diabetes, hypertension, weight loss, diverticulitis, heart disease, Crohn's disease, fibromyalgia, celiac disease, chronic fatigue syndrome. These are just a few of the autoimmune conditions that are associated with chronic inflammation. So what is chronic inflammation? How do we get chronic inflammation? And more importantly, how do we get rid of chronic inflammation? Chronic inflammation, there was a recent article in Time magazine that talked about chronic inflammation being the silent killer. Okay, so if it's that important that they call it the silent killer, what is chronic inflammation? In order to do that, we're going to have to look at the individual cell. Okay, so how many people out there were born? Okay, we all came from an individual cell. Mom and dad got together and we formed a cell. Okay, that cell divided, divided again, and divided again, divided again. And eventually it created an individual that is made up of about 55 trillion of these cells. Okay, now some of you out there are a few more trillion cells than others, but that's where we're going to talk about weight loss resistance. So, and first of all, talking about the cell. The cell is made up of a lipid bilayer, 2 layers of fat. Okay, we're going to just talk about the cell membrane or the lipid bilayer and also the nucleus of the cell where the DNA is. Okay, so this lipid bilayer or cell membrane in the DNA. Now, they did a study that they extracted the DNA out of the cell and the cell continued to function. But then what they did is they came back and they destroyed the cell membrane and the cell died right away. So what does this mean? This means that the DNA is not necessary in order for the cell to continue to function. That the cell membrane is actually more important, and it's the things on the outside or the environment that controls what's on the inside of the cell. Now, how does this happen? We also, on the outside of the cell, have what's called receptors that allow certain things into the cell. Those receptors allow things in such as vitamins, minerals, okay, and hormones, such as like insulin. Okay, so what we do is we eat certain foods, your body breaks down those foods, and breaks them down into vitamins, minerals, hormones such as insulin. Those receptor sites allow these molecules or these food items into the cell, where the DNA and other things inside the cell then produce other things, and they are excreted via these receptors back out of the cell. So those things that it produces are energy in the form of ATP, antioxidants, and other hormones. And then these things feed other cells in your body, and that's how your body functions. So this is the functioning of a normal cell. Okay? But what happens when we have chronic inflammation? When you have chronic inflammation, this cell membrane swells to the point where it shuts off these receptors, so these different things on the outside that are trying to get in can't get into the cell. Okay, they get to the cell membrane or the receptor and it blocks the receptors, so now the minerals, the vitamins, and the hormones can't get into the cell. But more importantly, the things that are produced inside the cell can't get out of the cell either. Okay, so the cell has 2 options. Number 1, the cell can die or the cell can mutate. Okay, when it mutates into what's known as cancer cells. But if it dies, it starts a process of early aging, which then causes these different conditions that we talked about in the beginning when you have cell death. Okay? So, how does this happen? How do we get, what are the causes of cellular swelling? There are 3 causes. Number 1, we have bad fats. 2, we have sugars. And 3, we have toxins. Okay, bad fats. So if we have bad fats, we also must have what? Good fats. Okay, What are some of the good fats? Some of the good fats would be avocados, olive oil, coconuts. Those are all good fats. When you eat a good fat, that good fat now goes to the cell membrane and actually builds up the cell membrane, makes it stronger, makes the receptors also bind these food items better so that they can get into the cell and the cell can function better. So those good fats actually help to make the cell thrive. Okay? Bad fats. What are bad fats? Bad fats are man-made fats. Okay, those would be like vegetable oil, hydrogenated fats, canola oil, margarine. Those are all bad fats. Those are all man-made fats. When you eat a bad fat, what it does is it comes down to the cell membrane and it adheres to the outside of the cell membrane. And they just keep growing on the outside of the cell membrane. But as far as the receptors are concerned, it gets to where the receptors are and it shuts off those receptors. Okay? So it clamps down on the receptors so the receptors can't function. So again, the vitamins, the minerals, the hormones can't get into the cell in order to do what it's supposed to do. But more importantly, again, when the cell is functioning correctly, now because of this swelling on the outside of the cell, those antioxidants, the energy, and the hormones can't get back out of the cell either, so the cell isn't functioning the way it's supposed to. Okay? So, that's what bad fats do. Next we have sugars. Okay? Sugars, unfortunately in our diet today, everything has added sugar in it. Your insulin receptor, there should be a 1-to-1 ratio between insulin and glucose, which is actually sugar. But all the foods that we eat nowadays have so much processed sugar in them that it throws off this ratio, and that increased sugar then leads to the destruction of the hormone or the receptor for the hormone, such as insulin. Okay? Sugar is also an excitatory product. You have receptors in your brain called glutamate receptors. Okay, these receptors are excitatory receptors. There are certain things that we eat that excite these different receptors. Okay, sugar being one of them. How many of you eat chocolate and you can't just stop at eating one bite of chocolate? You have to continue eating chocolate. That's because it stimulates these glutamate receptors, which then make your body crave that more and more. How many of you out here have kids? Okay, how many of you taken those kids to the grocery store and you're wheeling them down the cereal aisle, and what happens? They take every box of sugared cereal off the shelf and put it in your basket. Okay, because they eat it once and they start craving it and they want it more and more and more. But this increased sugar that's throwing off this ratio then starts destroying this insulin receptor because it excites the receptor to the point of death. The receptor then dies. So the receptor can no longer take the insulin inside the cell. Your body's still producing insulin, but the cell can't hear the insulin because it can't get inside the cell. And this is what type 2 diabetes is. That you get to the point where you have too much sugar production in the body from the different foods that we eat. You can take just about any diet that we have in today, any fast food that you go and eat. The bread has added sugar. The meats have added sugar. The condiments like the ketchup have added sugar in order to excite the palate or excite the receptors so that your body craves more and more and more. Now the manufacturers of all these different products know this and understand that and put that in the product in order for you to crave more and more of it and to get more sugar into your system, thus helping to destroy or increase the inflammation or destroying the receptors on the cell so that it can't function the way that it's supposed to. Okay? The other thing that sugar does is the #1 thing that feeds cancer cells in the body. So if you have cancer cells and you're increasing the amount of sugar, it's going to cause cancer cells to proliferate. Okay? So we talked about bad fats, sugars, and now we have toxins. Okay? So how do we get toxins? Toxins we get through the environment, through different things in the air. We get it through pesticides that are in the foods. We also get it through preservatives that they put in the foods. Again, these preservatives stimulate those glutamate receptors that are excitatory receptors in your brain. And so there are things like MSG and aspartame. Those are excitatory preservatives that cause the food to last longer, but they also destroy the cell membrane and also these receptors. The other thing about sugar, one of the other things I missed on sugar, is sugar not only destroys the hormone receptor, but it also competes with other receptors like the vitamin receptor. So sugar will actually go to this receptor and not allow vitamins into the cell, and so that is known as an anti-nutrient because it has no nutritional value at all, and it's inhibiting or keeping the vitamins to get into the cell in order to function like it's supposed to. Okay? So we eat certain things, our bodies take that in, they try to use, especially the toxins, you eat foods that have toxins in them, your body tries to use it, but it doesn't recognize that as food, and so it then adheres either to the lining of the cell or it starts to destroy these receptors. Okay? This whole process is known as oxidation. Okay? Oxidation and cellular swelling are synonymous terms. Okay? The cellular swelling that we talked about that are creating all these different diseases and syndromes can be combated by a product that your body produces. Your body produces these antioxidants. We talked about them before. Okay? The antioxidants actually combat or slow down the swelling process. That's what they're designed to do. One of the best hormone, or one of the best antioxidants that we have in the system is known as glutathione. Okay? Glutathione is actually produced in the cell, but it requires a lot of energy, or ATP. It actually requires 3 molecules of ATP in order to form 1 molecule of glutathione. Okay? So it's very expensive, it requires a lot of energy. But if the membrane isn't allowing things in to produce the energy, then we can't produce the glutathione. Then the glutathione can't work to slow down cellular swelling, and that's what leads to cell death and mutation of the cells.